I don't remember the year, but I remember the feeling. Being a kid, your parents take you to the movie rental store, happens to have a gaming aisle, running straight to it and seeing what I'm going to sink my time into this weekend. And on that weekend, my brothers and I chose War of the Monsters, and my god, I'm glad we did. And if you've never heard of War of the Monsters, don't worry, that's kind of what this video is all about. Let's get into it. In essence, at its core, War of the Monsters is a fighting game developed by Incog Entertainment. Most people know them as Incognito Entertainment, and published by Sony Computer Entertainment. It released on PlayStation 2 in North America on January 14th, 2003. The premise was simple. It was an alien invasion that goes wrong, like most of them would go right, and a bunch of their fuel from the UFOs spill all across the Earth, and that fuel mutates a handful of creatures and turns them into like 100-foot tall monsters. And these monsters then do what giant monsters do best. They fight each other while leveling and destroying everything in their path, usually in the middle of a city. The entire game, the whole game, is one big love letter to the 1950s B-movie sci-fi era of kaiju films. Every monster is basically a riff off of a classic movie archetype. The giant ape, the giant reptile that crawls out of the ocean, the alien with the oversized head, the walking robots. Without having to use any of the licensed names, you can tell it's obviously King Kong, Godzilla, the Blob, filtered through their own original cast so that Sony never had to pay anybody the rights. But you can obviously tell, as I am playing as the character, that is obviously a riff off of Godzilla fighting King Kong right now. May I add, for the first time in well over 2 decades, so I am very rusty trying to figure out what I'm doing. Keep that in mind as we roll on. Let's continue. Each level in the game had its own fictional B-movie poster featuring that stage's or that level's monster, which was a really nice touch, reinforcing the whole this is a lost drive-in movie aesthetic that the developers were obviously going for, which, may I add, they nailed. And one thing that this game actually does perfect that kind of separates itself from just like novelty and kept it in the realm of playability was the weight and scale of these monsters. They don't just move like classic fighting game characters, kind of click-clacky back and forth on the 2D world like Mortal Kombat. They move like they're 100-foot tall, heavy, deliberate, with real weight behind every hit. And you don't feel like you're just playing a guy in a suit, click-clacking back and forth, or it's like Rampage where you're just smashing buildings. You feel like you are some giant, enormous monster fighting in a city, like the Founding Fathers intended. It had destruction of buildings that actually mattered and made sense, that would change the environment. Things were fully destructible. I'm talking buildings, cars, bridges, billboards, anything you can pick up, you could throw it. And it wasn't just a visual flex, this was level building design, and it could open up new sight lines and remove opponents' cover and create pretty hazardous things mid-fight. The destruction changed how everything played out and made it look different in real time, and it was freaking awesome. I loved it. Especially getting on top of a building and impaling somebody and then powering down through it and just crumbling the whole thing. It was awesome, especially as a kid. Still fun as an adult. Another thing I remember is how excited I would get when one of the oil trucks rolled by me and I knew I was 10 seconds away from pissing off one of my siblings by opening up the fight with a Molotov cocktail straight from Mount Olympus. Whether it blew me up to or not, I was sending it. Another thing I enjoyed was the fact it was not a traditional one-on-one fighter. Unlike most fighting games of the era, War of the Monsters did not lock you into a structured round against a single opponent. It was a 2D world. The format was looser and more arena-based, which fit the giant monster causing chaos fantasy a whole lot better than a strict best-of-3 format would have on a 2D world. Again, to me, it always felt really click-clacky is the best way I can explain it. And this gave you so much more free reign than a lot of fighting games did for its time. Because the whole game leads into a practical B-movie monster aesthetic instead of chasing realism, it dodged the trap of the PS2 era games. Unfortunately, they all kind of fell into the same one if they chased realism, and that is this looked impressive in 2003, but rough by 2010, and so on. Stylized art tends to age a lot better than photorealism, and War of the Monsters is a good example of that. That chunky, exaggerated monster design and the miniature model city aesthetic still reads really intentional rather than dated, and still honestly looks well today. Obviously, some of the little details don't look near as well, things break into polygon shapes, but that's to be expected, and it still looks like it was designed really well even today. As you can tell by this point, am a little biased though, and I do love this game, but visually, I mean, come on, it looks great even now as it did for its time. I mean, I personally think one of the reasons why this game and Sly Cooper held up so well from the PS2 era is because of the art style they chose. Sound design is worth a mention here too. If you remember specifics, the roars, the impact sounds, the way buildings crumbled, the sounds your character would make when their energy is charged, the tactile feedback, if you will, is a big part of why the destruction and the monsters felt so satisfying to play instead of just decorative. Now let's talk a little bit about the brains behind the great game that is War of the Monsters. Incognito Entertainment was founded in 1999 in Salt Lake City by Scott Campbell, a former Single-Track developer, and Single-Track is the studio that originally made Jet Moto and Twisted Metal. So I love Twisted Metal, and this team had a serious pedigree going into making War of the Monsters. A guy named David, probably going to pronounce the last name wrong, looks like Jafe, who'd go on to also co-create God of War, was a part of this crew also, working as a producer and occasional designer, so it had some serious people cooking up this game. Before War of the Monsters, Incognito made their name on Twisted Metal Black in 2001, which was just an awesome game. I love that game, like I said. It was a strong seller for Sony, and that success is part of why Sony formally acquired the studio in August of 2002. Right before War of the Monsters shipped. At the time of its acquisition, the studio had only 51 employees, but by 2005, they'd become part of Sony's worldwide studios network, so War of the Monsters wasn't some scrappy indie side project. It came out of a studio that Sony had just bought and was actively investing in. Much better than the Bungie deal. Anyways, moving on from that. After War of the Monsters wrapped up, Incognito's attention shifted to Downhill Domination, which I also played, and then Warhawk, which was a multiplayer shooter that released in 2007. No surprise. Never played that, but it actually became a pretty significant online multiplayer title for its time, from what I could see. But that same year, 2007, Scott Campbell and David left Incognito along with a large chunk of the staff so they could start their own independent studio called Eat, Sleep, Play. The remainder of Incognito, led by Dylan Job, kept the studio running to support Warhawk, but in March of 2009, Job and several other remaining staff left to found Lightbox Interactive, where they built Starhawk, which was a successor to Warhawk. So with most of its core people gone, Incognito Entertainment was formally dissolved in 2009. I sounded like Tom DeLonge, and I miss you. In 2009, and no longer exist, unfortunately, although they brought some amazing games to us within their time. So there's a clear, documented answer as to why we didn't get a War of the Monsters sequel. It's not that the game failed or was forgotten internally, it's that the studio's key people scattered across 3 different companies within about 6 years, chasing other projects, which sucks. Now would be a great time for a game like this to resurface, in my opinion. There really is not much like it, and the amount of game modes they could add to something like this nowadays would be great. Like I said though, if you do want to play this classic game, it is available on the PS3, PS4, and the PS5, which is what I'm playing on currently. War of the Monsters didn't need a sequel to be worth remembering though. It's a complete, well-made game from a genuinely talented team at a moment when that team was actively being invested in, and it just happened to get pulled in a different direction before anybody could circle back. Maybe somebody will again someday, and if so, I'll be grabbing a copy myself. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you've ever played it, enjoyed the game, feel free to discuss it. Like it, comment why the video was great, comment why it sucked, and if you feel like it, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks everybody.